Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Well, welcome to So Many Books, So Little Time. My name is Joe Nash. I'm here with Zina Shevchik. We are both librarians here at the Colonie Library. The premise of our show is very simple. I'll go over it once again for the 23rd time. Zina and I, we go down to the new bookshelf and we go down to the technical services department where they're processing new books. And we brought up a whole bunch of new books to tell you about. And as usual, Zina will be going first. So Zina.
Okay. I tend not to pick out the ones that people might already know about, not bestsellers or things that are in the media being marketed in the mass media. So this first book, though, is by Ken Jennings, the Jeopardy champion from a few years ago, and it is called Maphead. And the subtitle is Charting the Wide, Weird World of Geography Wonks. So he calls himself a maphead. And a little bit autobiographical, but mostly it talks about other people like himself who are enthralled with all things about maps and geography. He himself said he used to sleep with an atlas from when he was 8 years old on. At that time, he and his family moved to South Korea for his father's job, and so that may have started his real interest in geography and maps. And it's actually a fascinating tale. He talks about, you know, the typical things you might think about with the National Geographic Bee and the students that are interested in that and get involved. He talks about the Library of Congress where there's millions of maps. He talks about people who collect maps. He talks about our country's lack of geography education in all levels of education, and how we're a nation of, I'm not sure how he puts it, but he basically says we don't know anything about where we are. He talks a little bit about the technology and how that's affected us, whether it's the GPS or you know, our going to the web for our directions. He talks about sense of place. It's actually written the reviews are very good, and they talk about how it's written in a witty but very informative manner. And I always have liked maps and the globe, and I have a good sense of direction. You know, who knows how much of that is innate and how much is learned, but one of the first things when I was growing up I remember is learning about topographic maps, and even though I was not a nerd or a wonk in any way, that was an interest of mine too, and I still enjoy following maps when we like that. So it's not a dry, dull. It's very entertaining as well, and by Ken Jennings.
Well, you can learn a lot from maps. About being on Jeopardy there?
No, he wrote another book.
Okay.
That was about that.
Well, my first book I'm going to talk about out in 1981, but this book is not 30 years old. It's now in its 5th edition. It's gone through many, obviously, and the information's been added. And since I've been a librarian for 25 years, and I'm sure you know this book, Zina, this book was one of the first of its kind to help people that are caring for people with Alzheimer's or dementia. The book is called The 36-Hour Day, and I have to say, in my 25 years of being a librarian, this is easily one of the most asked for books. Every library I've worked at, always has 2 and 3 and 4. The bigger libraries I've worked at, 5, 6 copies. This was the book, like I said, it's the first of its kind. It's still regarded as the best. I mean, it's simply to say this is the Bible if you're caring for someone with dementia, Alzheimer's, or early onset, and of course down through the years they've added to it. They've added related dementias, memory loss, and it's a book for the people who, not just the people you're caring for, if you're caring for someone in that situation, but it's for the people, the caregivers themselves. So it goes into definitions, characteristics, it defines everything, it tells you different problems that can arise, how to get outside help, how to, nursing homes, it goes through all the alternatives. And of course, now that this is the 5th edition, it has stuff about the internet, it's got a section for kids and teenagers. I don't think we're in the first editions. It has a section at the end here, preventing or delaying cognitive decline. I don't know if that was in the first edition 30 years ago, but anyway. So like I said before, simply put, this is the Bible for people who are caring for people and themselves too. A family guide to caring for people who have Alzheimer's disease, related dementias, and memory loss. And like I said, it's the Bible for this. Now, Zina, you probably know this book.
Yes, I do.
Okay,
yes, I do, and I think you're right about it's the go-to book.
And it is. It's to say this is the 5th edition. It's been out for 30 years, but it's one of those books that every library has, and probably most people know about if you're in that situation.
Right,
so
it's the standard.
Brand new, 2011. So a lot of updated information in here. And as they learn more from research, all the different subsequent editions, there's more and more. I think the original one. This new one is over 300 pages. I think the original one wasn't anywhere near this big, but...
Yeah, it really helps when you're trying to figure out how to interact with people who have, memory problems.
And like I say, this book covers everything.
Yeah,
so.
It does. It's very good.
Okay. Zina?
This is segue. The Great Big Book of Horrible Things, but the subtitle is The Definitive Chronicle of History's 100 Worst Atrocities. Now, it sounds like a book for maybe young lads who are into jokes and creepy crawly things or whatever, but it really is a history book. And it's written by a man named Matthew White. He calls himself an atrocitologist for atrocities. He made up that word. So, I mean, there's some humor here. It's like wry humor. He is the creator of an online historical atlas of the 20th century. So he's an historian of sorts, and this is actually very interesting. He ranks atrocities in the centuries, across centuries. He presents them in chronological order, but what he is trying to do is, what makes it interesting is that he ranks the different wars and whatever, man-made debacles, and he devotes quite a bit of time at the beginning and at the end analyzing the human tendency toward violence and what causes violent chaotic situations to erupt. As I said, it's chronological in its format, but he has the content, the table of contents is arranged by type of atrocity, genocide, what else does he have here? The Western way of war, the black chapter of communism, the Cold War. Some of it was, he calls them multicides. And I don't know if any of you would guess this. He includes, it's the Second World War as the top-ranked atrocity, but he includes all civilians that were killed as well. And he enjoys the argument of where to rank these awful events and what to count, what human beings to count, and how to count them. And so he has a lot of appendix that talk about the different causes of war and what has caused the most people to die. And so it's a statistical analysis, and that's basically what he's interested in, is in statistics and arguing statistics. And he finds that this is one of the topics that people like online, his online site, like to argue about the most, about what were the worst. But it's actually
people argue about that stuff.
Yes, he says no. I mean, it sounds awful, but under each like the Vietnam War, he'll have the death toll, the rank, the type of war. An ideological civil war. In this case, he says the dividing line, and he puts communist versus capitalist, the time frame, location, and he said one of the comments is who usually gets the most blame for the war, and the unanswerable question everyone asks. In the case of Vietnam War, it was how did the world's greatest superpower get beaten by a bunch of second-rate third worlders? But the history is true. The information is true, and the analysis at the end. Again, it's with wry humor, but it's something that I think a lot of people would find very interesting. So, The Great Big Book of Horrible Things: The Definitive Chronicle of History's 100 Worst Atrocities, and it's a thick book.
Okay, is that book? Is it all wars?
No, actually,
Are there natural disasters?
There's some. No, they're not natural disasters at all. It's about people creating their own problems. But it does have like our. I want to say blockade. It's not blockade. Hold on, let me see. When we. Embargoes, right? Let's see. When the U.S. sanctions against Iraq, 1990 to 2003. This was, number 94 of 101. The least number of casualties, is 100. But the sanctions against Iraq, 1990 to 2003, national countries imposing sanctions against Iraq. He quotes 350,000 people died, but then at the very end he quotes Saddam Hussein's rule over Iraq, 79 and 2003, and that only generated 300,000 casualties. Okay. So most of them are wars. Don't get me wrong, but there's these other things.
Okay, well, I wasn't going to talk about this book, but only because you're talking about that book. So we shouldn't be laughing, though. That's the Worst Atrocities. Okay, this book is called Tyrants: History's 100 Most Evil Despots and Dictators. Now, this book, unlike yours, has no analysis or introduction. It's just a listing here. And it's not in, yours ranks them in order of what he thought was the worst. This one is purely chronological. It goes from the ancient world, Middle Ages, Napoleon, et cetera, up to modern days. So each entry is only two or three pages. So you get the basic facts of, you got your, how can I say this? You got your Caligulas and your Neros and your Vlad the Impalers, Henry VIII, Ivan the Terrible. We shouldn't be laughing, but Catherine the Great, and then it goes into the modern era with. I
didn't know that Catherine the Great was a
according to this
tyrant. Okay.
And then we have this goes right in. It goes right up to Hitler and Mao, Lenin, Stalin, etc. Into right up to Saddam Hussein and Pol Pot and all that. So, and it's got each one's 2 or 3 pages. It's kind of interesting. But you know how in books like this they have these little sidebars with dates, life and times. The sidebars here are called life and crimes with little dates. But anyway, I shouldn't be laughing. But it's a serious book. Tyrants: History's 100 Most Evil Despot and Dictators by Nigel Cawthorne. Zina?
Okay. I actually looked through that book. I looked through that book. And I actually learned a couple of things from that book about people I did not know about. This is a complete departure. I usually try to offer at least one book of fiction, and I didn't have a book of fiction that I liked enough to bring up. But this book reads like fiction. It's a memoir of a writer called Teresa Weir. She apparently writes mysteries, although I've actually never read any of her mysteries. She writes mysteries under the name of Anne Fraser. I'll have to try some. But this is a memoir of her marriage, basically. It's called The Orchard. And I read it in one sitting. It's not a light subject, but you know, her life was not easy. But it's written very well, and I really enjoyed it. She grew up kind of in the cities with a broken family, just by a single mother, hardscrabble life, and mostly it's about her marriage to a farmer, an apple orchard farmer in the Midwest, and its secondary subject is about what the farmers have to do to make a living, and in this case it's the pesticides that they have to do, and the chemicals they have to use to keep their crops and their fields fertile. So that's kind of the sad part, but the marriage was a success, but it just is a touching story, and it's light reading, but it was really pleasant reading it. So it may not make the bestseller list, but I recommend it. The Orchard, a memoir by Teresa Weir, W-E-I-R.
Okay. Well, I'm going to talk about two books now because they're about the same person and his works. These are the kind of books that are making me feel old. When you have this,
the history of the 1960s.
When you have the heroes of your youth, or after they've died, and now books are written about them and their work, and it does make one feel old. So these are two new books. One's a biography and one's about his work. A new biography of Kurt Vonnegut. I mentioned him a show or two back because Kurt Vonnegut was in the Library of America, so he died in 2005. I used to read all his books when I was a teenager, and back then he was only like in his 50s, I think. But anyway, I haven't read this yet, but it's been getting very good reviews. It's the first biography, full length. It's called And So It Goes, Kurt Vonnegut, A Life, by Charles Shields. It's getting good reviews. Now, do you know what the title refers to, Zina? And So It Goes.
No, I don't. It's one of his books. It's what is it? What was it? I'll say Cat's Cradle.
Okay, well, as long as we had all this stuff about atrocities and horror, in the book Slaughterhouse-Five, it's about World War II. Someone counted these. There's over 100. Every time in Slaughterhouse-Five someone dies or someone is mentioned to have died, it's followed by And So It Goes. So that was kind of Kurt Vonnegut's humor.
And I read that book 40 years ago. Did you remember that from the book?
Yes,
See, you have such a memory.
Well,
you really do.
So anyway, I don't have much to say about it other than I haven't read it yet, but it's been getting good reviews, and it's the first full-length biography. Charles Shields wrote one of the few biographies of Harper Lee, which was very well received. And he had access. He interviewed Kurt Vonnegut right up for a couple of years before he died. He had unprecedented access to 1,500 letters and all that. So, and he interviewed a lot of people, his family and everything. So it looks like it is. It's also authorized.
He has local connections.
Yes.
I know some of his family was around here.
Kurt Vonnegut lived in Schenectady in the early 50s, and his brother taught at SUNY Albany. And this is this is also a new book. It's not a biography, but it is a book. It's called Unstuck in Time, A Journey Through Kurt Vonnegut's Life and Novels. It's mainly an analysis of all his major works, his books, and the themes and all that. And obviously, when you're writing about someone in all their books, a sort of a biography will come through, right from his days as a short story writer in the early 50s, with player piano, right up into his last book, Armageddon in retrospect. And anyway, Unstuck in Time. Now, Zina, do you know where this title comes from?
No, I don't. Obviously one of his books, but which one? No.
Now, this too also comes from Slaughterhouse-Five.
Okay.
If you remember the first sentence of the book is, listen, Billy Pilgrim has become unstuck in time. And in that book, he keeps bopping back and forth to different parts of his life, not in order. He's unstuck in time, although this book goes chronological. But anyway, it's a nice title for a book about his work. So, new biography of Kurt Vonnegut, And So It Goes, and a book about his life and works, an analysis of his writings, Unstuck in Time. Zina?
So our audience, when you want any literary tidbits to be unearthed, Joe is the person to whom you should go. This next one is called Culture Shock, A Survival Guide to Customs and Etiquette, and this one is of the USA. Now, I am a student of, well, I enjoy social and cultural analysis as well as self-analysis, so I really enjoyed reading this book. There's wit and humor involved. It's a series of books that's written for countries around the world, assuming that you're going to spend more than a couple of days in this country or city. And I enjoyed this analysis of the American way of life. The woman who has written this book is an American. She was brought up in Massachusetts in the Hudson Valley, and I guess then she spent a lot of time in Los Angeles. But she bases this book on her discussions and interviews with lots of immigrants to this country, contemporary immigrants to this country. So I found it fascinating. And we also have a couple other books for other countries. Culture Shock, this is France. I think we have Turkey. There are other countries that other libraries in our system have. It's really, it's very informative, and it's funny too. It talks about how Americans or French regard friends. Like in France, I found it interesting. They do not invite people back to their homes. That's very unusual for them to have house parties or dinner parties. It's a big coup if you get an invitation to a meal at a French home. It talks about how differently we treat our friends. It talks about how in the U.S. our work environment, our coworkers become a sort of family, and that's not usually the way it is in other parts of the world. It says you can always pick out an American because they're smiling. I never thought of that they smile at other people. It's more in, talked about a little bit more in here than that. It talks about how Americans are enthusiastic and have an air of confidence that you will not find in other countries. It talks about a lot about our, the value of work here, the lack of relaxation, status seeking, efficiency, independence, equality. Those are as American values. It also talks about things about how we handle funerals, how holidays are treated in the U.S. It has a picture of a typical ranch home in the U.S. That cracked me up, and it's just like the home that I grew up with in, a typical ranch home. One picture. This is out of the whole U.S. This is a typical American home. It has some cartoons that are hilarious and spot on. It talks about things that you might want to know if you were moving into a country. About how women are treated in business, and how neighbors are, how you treat your neighbors, how do people rear their children. But it was fascinating. I think it's funny. It's interesting what pictures they choose to show. They show the Thanksgiving Day parade. They show the Yellowstone Park. They show a big football game, football game. But then they also show Hasidic Jews teaching their children. They show a mall. Some of these are stereotypical things, but a lot of it I wouldn't have thought of, like that whole thing about Americans smiling. Well, gosh, when I was in London and we were all on the tube and the three of us were smiling, and I have to say, looking back on it, nobody else on the tube was smiling. So I guess they knew who we were. Culture Shock, USA, Survival Guide to Customs and Etiquette, and we also have a few other countries.
Are they in with the travel books, or are they sociology books?
Yes, they're travel books, 917.3.
Okay, here's a book that's getting getting good reviews. It seems to be a combination expose, and I guess it has some humor, but once I tell you about it or you read about it, I'm not sure how much humor can be in this. But it's called Intern Nation, and the subtitle is How to Earn Nothing and Learn Little in the Brave New Economy. And the book is about how large companies and large bodies of government, like state legislatures and congresses, use interns. I don't want to say use and abuse, but use them for free labor, because interns usually don't get paid. They may get, I think it depends on. But in some of the facts I I was just looking at the book. I haven't read it, but it looks pretty good. I did not know this, but Disney World down in Florida,
Yes.
8,000 interns
Wow.
work there.
Unpaid?
Apparently. And then they were saying at certain times of the year, if Congress, if you put Congress, and this is Washington, D.C., I guess is the capital of internships, between Congress, think tanks, and nonprofit groups, certain times of the year, the number of interns outnumber the staff people, actually. Not the whole year, but...
Revolt.
They're saying. So anyway, so this book, like I say, got some good reviews. They say it's, he does it with a little bit of humor, but it's not a humorous book. But it is called The Fascinating and Overdue Expose, Intern Nation, How to Earn Nothing and Learn Little in the Brave New Economy. And I think, Zina, you told me once you have two daughters. Were both of them interns, or were one of them?
One of them was an intern. She was paid,
Oh, she was
but
paid.
they roomed in Manhattan with quite a few other interns in different fields in New York, in Manhattan one summer, and none of the others were paid.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's
It was in the
I think
fast.
it's always trade-offs. I think you can get valuable experience and it's the only way to get your foot in the door in a lot of places. But I guess sometimes they don't get paid, or
Right, and
the
sometimes it
conditions-
doesn't lead to employment.
Sometimes it doesn't. So anyway, this is a book, Intern Nation. Zina?
I think interning is useful. It can also tell the the intern, whether or not it's a field they want to go into, or if they feel comfortable in that field. So that's it. So I decided to talk about this because it's somewhat related to the Culture Shock USA book I just talked about. This is Emily Post's Etiquette book, Manners for a New World. It's the 18th edition. It's written by the great-great-granddaughters and great-granddaughter-in-law of the original Emily Post. And certainly we live in a new kind of world, and when was it? See, I don't know when the first one was written. Let's see if I can find that out. It doesn't say right up front, but just that it's the 18th edition. I found it interesting. There's the typical, I won't say typical, there's a reason why you might go to the Emily Post etiquette book, is if you were going to meet the President, First Lady, or have an audience with the Pope for the first time. There's wedding etiquette, but even in today's world, wedding etiquette is different because you're blending usually so many families sometimes, and sometimes there's a third wedding, not just the second. It has a section on telling the children if you're going to get remarried, who stands in the receiving line. It has wedding trends for the 21st century. It even has what to do when your former spouse dies. It has a section on elder etiquette, meaning how you handle yourself and your relative in an assisted living environment. It has a section on dealing with dementia. It has a section called At the Fitness Center. It has a section called Personal Communication Devices. It talks about using cameras on those devices, setting ringtones on those devices.
I was going to ask you if they had the new media and computer stuff in there.
Yes, it does. And it talks about blogging, gaming, talks about business emails, it talks about behavior on online casinos. So it's fascinating. Emily Post Etiquette, 18th century. 18th edition, 18th century.
So you said behavior in online gambling casinos?
That's what it says.
All right.
Behavior. I didn't read it. I just saw the heading, online casino.
Okay, now our show is called So Many Books, So Little Time. We really should call it, if we ever talked about everything that goes on in the library, it should be called So Many Library Items, So Little Time.
That's
because
right.
Besides just this show's about books, but we have all kinds of DVDs, audio books, and we have music CDs, and now we have the downloadables. I guess they're still books, but...
Yes, they are. And
I'm
sometimes the same title in all those formats.
But I'm going to mention this quick before I talk about this book. We bought, I guess we should say, if you're a quilter or a knitter or into crafts, 2 series. I only have 2 of them here, but they take up a whole thing here. This is called Quilting Arts TV. I guess it was a TV series on PBS. So we have 7 series on quilting. Each series has 13 episodes. And we have Knitting Daily TV. Again, 7 series, each one with 13 episodes, which gives you 182 episodes on quilting and knitting.
Has your wife looked at those and she
Not
likes
yet. We
them?
just got them.
Okay.
So these, by the time you, we're filming the show in late November, so these will be on the shelf by the time the show is on. And it's a multi-volume set. So we have quilting and knitting, and I think there was a couple more I didn't really look at. There was a couple on crocheting or something. So if you're into that, and these DVDs, I think they're instructional, they got ideas. They're supposed to be pretty good. That's just one non-book item. I'm going to mention a book now. A new biography of someone I really liked. He was controversial. He was someone probably either people loved or hated. But I really liked this guy when he was on. Unfortunately, he died a few years ago. But a new biography of Howard Cosell.
Now I feel old.
The Man, the Myth, and the Transformation of American Sports. I haven't read this yet. I was skimming it. I was reading the chapter about Monday Night Football. There's some really good behind-the-scenes stuff in there. But Howard Cosell, he came off as a bombastic, kind of self-promoting.
Yes.
Kind of, but behind the scenes, he was a very smart guy. He was Muhammad Ali's lawyer. I don't know if a lot of people know that. He came up and, but he really told it like it was. That's like he used to say. And he was a serious journalist besides sports, and he took sports into, when he dealt with the '72 Olympics and I should say the '68 Olympics when there was a protest in Mexico City, '72 Olympics with the terrorist attack, and he did tell like it was. And this book goes into his whole life, and I heard the author on a talk show. It was very interesting, made me want to read it. So Howard Cosell, The Man, the Myth, and the Transformation of American Sports by Mark Rybowski. Zina?
Do we have time? Because
Yes,
you want to talk
yes.
about justice.
Okay.
Just one more quickly. This is a travel book. It's the New York Times, 36 hours, 150 weekends in the USA and Canada. It follows a column that's been in the New York Times since 2002, written by local experts wherever the destination is, and it's like a long weekend. What you should do if you're in a place for only like 2 or 3 days. And actually, it's very interesting because I've done a fair amount of traveling in the U.S. and they have some standards, the typical place you might think to go, like in Manhattan, the Statue of Liberty, but they also bring up more obscure things that I would not have known or thought about. It gives advice about different levels of hotels and restaurants and what to do when, and the order in which to do things. And I think it's a super book. And they updated if the article was written back in 2002, they've updated it for this book. It has great pictures. It shows like snow sledding, dog sledding in Mount Tremblant in Canada, which really isn't that far away. So if you can't make it to Alaska for some dog sledding adventure, you can make it up to Canada. It really isn't that far. That kind of thing. It covers the big cities, but it has some out of the way places as well. So obviously, if you're going someplace for 3 days, you have to be able to get there and back pretty quickly if it's supposed to be long weekends. So 36 hours, 150 weekends in the USA and Canada, New York.
Okay, I'll end now with a book and one other thing. Someday we're going to get to all the books we bring up, Zina.
Yeah, we love books.
Well, this show will be airing all during December and into the first half, I think, of January, the way it's scheduled. And on Thursday, January 19th, so you can plan this if you're out there watching. On Thursday, January 19th, our noon book review is going to be on this book. It's not a new book, but I'm going to tell you why we're doing it. It's called Justice, What's the Right Thing to Do by Michael Sandel of Harvard University. You may have seen his PBS series. It was a 12-part series on ethics. It was based on this book. And this spring, I think in either late January or February through May or June, it's still in the planning stages, correct, Zina?
Yes, right.
We're going to be having several events at the library centered on this book and Professor Sandel's series from PBS. We're going to show some episodes or some excerpts and have discussions in the library. We're not going to do all 12, but we're going to do several, like maybe 7 or 8. But to kick off our series on ethics here, we're going to have a noon book review of Professor Sandel's book, Justice, Thursday, January 19th. And our book reviewer is going to be Paul Santilli of Siena College from the philosophy department. And he actually uses this book in his classes. And there's more information on the website, or there's flyers in our library, tells you all about it. And one final quick thing, our noon book review, we're having 2 in January, besides Justice. We're going to have our usual noon book review on a newer book on, I have it here, Tuesday, January 10th, Bill O'Reilly's book, Killing Lincoln. I have a picture there. It's going to be a very interesting noon book review because the Bill O'Reilly book is a mega bestseller, and it's been receiving really good reviews, been really bad reviews.
Yes, I know.
And it's been receiving
historians really.
And it's been receiving sort of good press and bad press, I guess you could say. And another interesting thing, the amateur reviewers, the last time I looked on Amazon, this is amazing to me, but this is like a red state, blue state, Fox News, MSNBC divide, because it was almost even. There was 960 5-star reviews. There was 1,051 1-star reviews. And in the middle, there was like only 200. So people are either, so I don't know what this means.
Well, some historians are quibbling with its accuracy
Yeah.
and his emphasis on certain things. But I mean, that's typical, I think, of that how we learn our history these
Yeah.
days. We learn them from reality shows, maybe.
So Tuesday, January 10th, our noon book review of the Bill O'Reilly book, Killing Lincoln. Our reviewer is going to be J.J. Jennings. He was here last May, and he did our noon book review of My Thoughts Be Bloody, the bitter rivalry that led to the assassination of Abe Lincoln. He is part of the Civil War Roundtable, Capital District Civil War Roundtable, Civil War Trust, Friends of the Ulysses S. Grant Cottage, Friends of Gettysburg, the Major General Winfield Scott Hancock Society. He knows a lot about the Civil War. He's not a professional historian, but he's studied it his whole life. He was a history major, and he gave a great, if you weren't here last year, one of our all-time best noon book reviews. So he should be very interesting to talk about the Bill O'Reilly book. So
What a combination.
So that'll be Tuesday, January 10th, and then Justice, Thursday, January 19th, which will kick off our series later in the spring about this book. So
Now, people have said about Justice, this book is absolutely indispensable for anyone who wants to be a good citizen. It shows how to balance competing values, a talent our nation desperately needs nowadays.
So if you're interested in that subject, come to the library and our new book review. And we're going to be talking about all the issues in this book and have discussions. So that is it for this time, and we'll see you next time on So Many Books, So Little Time.